The United States government must speak out boldly in support of international humanitarian law.
Bernie Sanders recently gave a powerful speech focused on foreign policy, and I'm going to share some of those clips with you. Now, this was at the Islamic Society of North America convention, or ISNACON, and this speech was very well received, not just by critics, but also by people in the audience. So this piece here from Dean Obeidallah: the star of the annual Muslim convention was a Jewish man from Brooklyn. Trevor Noah, host of The Daily Show, wasn't the only draw. Well-known Muslim Americans, including Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib and Women's March organizer Linda Sarsour, spoke to large crowds. The most popular person, however, was a 77-year-old Jewish man born and bred in Brooklyn. I'm speaking of 2020 presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders, of course. While Noah, Tlaib, and Sarsour attracted the attention of many, Sanders packed the venue that held nearly 7,000, receiving several standing ovations. And he goes on to say, the night truly belonged to Sanders, or Uncle Bernie, as many Muslims affectionately refer to the junior senator from Vermont. And the reason for that is simple. Sanders has worked hard to earn the support of the Muslim community. It began during the 2016 presidential primary when he was running against Hillary Clinton. Many in the Muslim community were wary of Clinton, given her support of the Iraq War. Sanders opposed the war, a fact of which he reminded the audience on Saturday, earning him loud applause. And Obeidallah also goes on to mention other reasons why the Muslim community is in support of Bernie Sanders, including Sanders slamming Trump's hateful lies about Muslims during the 2016 election, how Bernie's been outspoken about Trump's travel ban, and also how Sanders treats Palestinians as human beings. Shockingly. I mean, it's incredible that these are even points worth mentioning, but it's because he is a rare politician that actually treats people as people, as opposed to what many Democratic politicians do, and that's take the side of the right-wing Israeli government against Palestinians. But apart from that, so look, Bernie's been a unifying voice, not just, in America, but also worldwide, because he is one of the rare, really, he is the only 2020 Democratic candidate that actually speaks on these foreign policy issues and does so from a humanitarian perspective. So I'm going to share a few clips here. Now, this speech was about 30 minutes long. Obviously, I'm not going to show the whole speech. I will have a link to it below the video so you can watch the entire thing if you want. But I want to pull out just pieces of when Bernie's talking about different foreign policy issues that other candidates just are not talking about. So let me start here with Bernie Sanders calling out both Republicans and Democrats, and him also talking about China's treatment of the Uyghurs.
Since September 11th, 2001, foreign policy elites in both the Republican and the Democratic Party have advocated endless war and interventionism that have undermined the United States' moral authority, cost us thousands of lives, drained our treasury, and corroded our democracy. Right now, as we speak, China is engaged in a program of mass internment against Muslims in Xinjiang province. My administration will work with our allies to let Beijing know that abuse of Muslim citizens or any other group of people will damage its international and economic standing. We will not stand by and allow that to happen.
So, look, this just does not come from other candidates. Bernie Sanders is the only candidate for the Democratic nomination that is actually willing to call out not just Republicans on foreign policy, but also the failure of Democrats on foreign policy. But then he gets into specifics, this time with China. So China's treatment of the Uyghurs, which are a Turkic ethnic group, primarily Muslim. Here's a little more on that from CBS News. According to the United Nations, more than 1 million Chinese Uyghur Muslims are being detained in government internment camps. China calls these prison camps in Xinjiang province re-education facilities meant to fight extremism and separatism in the region. The U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China describes it as, quote, the largest mass incarceration of a minority population in the world today. So, again, look up other candidates. See if they've talked about this. Because from what I've seen, it's been silence. Bernie Sanders is the only 2020 candidate with an actual foreign policy, let alone one that is also humanitarian. Now, let me also go to there's several clips here. Next, Bernie talks about what's happening in Kashmir.
I am also deeply concerned about the situation in Kashmir, where the Indian government has revoked Kashmiri autonomy, cracked down on dissent, and instituted a communications blackout. The crackdown in the name of security is also denying the Kashmiri people access to medical care. Even many respected doctors in India have acknowledged that the Indian government imposed restrictions on travel are threatening the life-saving care that patients need. India's action is unacceptable. The communications blockade must be lifted immediately, and the United States government must speak out boldly in support of international humanitarian law and in support of a UN-backed peaceful resolution that respects the will of the Kashmiri people.
So this again, another topic that even so-called progressive candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Tulsi Gabbard have been silent on. I mean, especially with someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who tries to put herself out there as the foreign policy candidate. To be silent on this issue really shows a blind spot. Again, Bernie Sanders is the leader on these issues, and in many cases is the only person actually talking about them. Here's more on this from Newsweek. The UN Human Rights Office and Amnesty International India recently painted a grim picture of deteriorating conditions under lockdown in Kashmir, including arbitrary arrests, a media blackout, and swelling violence, in separate statements sent to Newsweek. Raja Farooq Haider, the Prime Minister of Pakistan-administered Kashmir, also appealed for international support to free residents from what he called, quote, the world's largest open-air prison, across the border in a recent conversation with Newsweek. So again, Bernie Sanders, only candidate talking about this issue. Let's get to the next clip here where he discusses the Israeli occupation.
One of the places where that leadership is most needed is to broker a lasting Israeli-Palestinian peace process. I am a strong supporter of the right of Israel to exist in independence, peace, and security. But I also believe that the United States needs to engage in an even-handed approach toward that long-standing conflict, which results in ending the Israeli occupation and enabling the Palestinian people to have independence and self-determination in a sovereign, independent, economically viable state of their own.
So this issue I kind of already touched on earlier, but again, this is a rare topic for a Democrat to touch, or I should say for a Democratic candidate to touch. Elizabeth Warren has had moments, a couple tweets here and there mentioning it. Tulsi Gabbard, a couple tweets here and there mentioning it. But they both have a poor history on this issue. If you look back on their history, they have been on the other side of this issue in the past. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders has been consistent in standing up for human rights in the region. And look, there's even... You could actually critique Bernie Sanders from the left here, because there is a discussion that that it's too late for a two-state solution, and actually a one-state with human rights is ultimately where this discussion needs to go. But I mean, even apart from that, Bernie Sanders is the only person even approaching an actual realistic human rights-based discussion on this issue. Let's get to the next clip here, where Sanders talks about the Saudi-led war in Yemen.
As you know, the United States has been backing the brutal government of Saudi Arabia, whose intervention in that civil war has led to this humanitarian crisis where millions are at risk of starvation in what could be the worst famine in modern history. Earlier this year, in a bipartisan effort, I introduced and passed, for the first time since the passage of the War Powers Act, a resolution calling on President Trump to end U.S. support for that horrific war.
And ultimately, Trump vetoed that. Even though Bernie Sanders led the effort, actually got a majority of Republicans on board. Bernie Sanders did. It went to Trump, and Trump vetoed it. But imagine it was somebody else in that position of power. Imagine it wasn't Trump. Imagine it was Bernie Sanders. Again, you have somebody here who not only shows leadership, but shows success in that leadership, is actually able to bring two parties together on an issue like the Saudi-led war in Yemen and the U.S. support of that war. So there is no comparison here. No candidate even comes close to Bernie Sanders on foreign policy, which is why Bernie Sanders is the only choice for Democrats in this primary. Now, let me just end on the last clip here. It's just a piece from Bernie's closing, which gives you sort of an overall perspective on his approach to foreign policy.
As history reminds us, the antidote to hatred and division is to bring people together around a shared vision of equality and prosperity, of creating societies that work for all and not just the few. When we are in the White House together, we will begin to rebuild a sense of community in our country and understanding that we are all in this together.
So there you go. I don't want to endlessly repeat myself here, but once again, Bernie Sanders showcasing he is the only candidate with a global humanitarian approach to foreign policy. No other candidate has even barely mentioned any of these issues, let alone come close to this overarching approach to foreign policy that Bernie Sanders has. It's important to understand here. A lot of candidates on stage, even if it's someone like Elizabeth Warren, who occasionally says the right things, someone like that could easily be overtaken by the established powers in Washington if they were put into power. Bernie Sanders has a lifelong record dedicated to human rights. He is somebody that is a fighter for the average person, not just the average American, but the average human being across the globe. So that is the kind of person you would nominate as the Democratic nominee and would easily wipe the floor with Trump in a general election, as you've seen from all the polling that shows Bernie winning. Poll after poll after poll after poll shows general election matchups. Bernie trounces Trump, and most importantly, trounces Trump in states that Hillary lost to Trump in 2016. Bernie Sanders is the most electable candidate and also the most humanitarian candidate, and I think clearly the only person that should be seriously considered for the Democratic nomination.